Welcome to the Second Plan A podcast. Do you think they got that?
And the second plan A for this week is we are re-releasing episode 6, Confronting Confirmation Bias, because Amber talks too much and now can't talk at all. So I think it was a really good one. So if you've not made it to that one yet, this will be a good opportunity to catch it. And if you listened to it already, listen to it again and share it. Send it to people. Make sure that you've given us that 5-star review, all those good things. And we will be back with a new episode, assuming Amber can talk. This is a blessing and a curse, by the way. I won't talk about either of those things.
Or not rude, actually. I'm confused.
I could have just said it was a blessing. It's a blessing and a curse. Again, we'll just leave it hanging there. So tomorrow's episode 6, Confronting Confirmation Bias. Get you with a new one next week. Thanks, everybody.
It's also our Wife of Violence days, so don't be too confused with the different introduction. It's still us in all of our glory.
Thanks, everybody. She couldn't help it. She had to talk.
I'm trying so hard.
Welcome to the Wife of Violence podcast, where we dive deep into topics of personal growth, passion, and leadership, all with violence on our mind. I'm Amber, I'm the wife.
I'm Ryan, I'm the violence.
And this morning we both woke up and chose violence.
Every day.
I mean, I choose you every day, so that's me choosing violence every day, right?
Right.
Okay, just making sure. All right, on this episode.
You have to explain it.
It was for me, not for them. They know. On this episode, we are discussing echo chambers. Echo chambers.
I thought you were having a stroke.
If you're watching this, I literally have in my notes, pause for amusement from Ryan. And this is the amusement that I expected.
Yeah.
Just a glare. Okay, I couldn't resist. On this episode, we are exploring the confirmation bias, how it shapes our own reality, and how we can break free from the echo chambers of our lives. Are you ready?
Yeah, this should be good.
All right. I looked at a study on confirmation bias from Cornell University. It was actually done in 1993, which everything about like my research brain and what I know is like, that's way too old. Like the data is going to be from the 80s. Probably should find something different, except that I think it's a fun place to start since it's an analysis done pre-social media. And of course, even before the World Wide Web was really released to the public. So the actual study is a little intense. It's focused on testing confirmation bias through scientific hypothesis testing. But I thought the way they looked at the definitions of confirmation bias was pretty interesting. And I'm sure we'll hit all of them or most of them as we move through this podcast. The one I want to start with is this idea that people often do not accurately perceive data unless their theory predicts that the data should be there. Basically, if you think of a Venn diagram where one circle is all the evidence and information about a subject, and then the other circle is your own beliefs, where they interlap is all people mostly perceive. Now, this study doesn't have the benefit or detriment of social media attached to it, but we have some prime content for observing this, thankfully. In our other world of mainly violence, we posted a YouTube video relatively recently about using someone's clothing in a self-defense situation to facilitate a sweep or a submission, and enter a complete stranger to us to let us know that the scenario is unrealistic and jiu-jitsu is only for competition and not self-defense.
Was this the nipple biter?
Yes. Wow, I don't know how to flag this on on Spotify, but there we go, right into it.
I mean, if it got into YouTube, it can get onto Spotify.
You're right.
I mean, we all fall victim to confirmation bias and echo chambers and whatever. And I think there's probably confirmation bias plays a big part in echo chamber, but we see it all over our industry, especially, and it's probably true in any industry and organization and whatever. As people, as humans, we want to believe that we're right. We want to believe that other people think the way that we think, and that any way outside of that is wrong because that makes it clean and easy. It removes our responsibility for thinking critically, which I think is, you and I've had this discussion before. Maybe I'm going to show my age here, but I feel like critical thinking was something that was also pre-internet, pre-social media, because I think having every bit of information humanly possible in the palm of your hand or in your pocket or whatever almost removes the necessity for thinking critically. If I am unsure of how to do something, or I run into some sort of problem, or I'm trying to fix a thing, or whatever it is, as soon as it kind of becomes more than what I thought it was, I just pull out my phone, I find a YouTube video on it. This is how you fix it. So I never have to actually figure out how to do things.
See, and in my book, in my generation, going to YouTube and finding a video is figuring it out.
Yes, but it's not.
I understand. I don't understand.
It's a weird thing because, we want to label it as progress, and on, most metrics, it is progress. But I think it on a human level, it's making us less capable, less functional, less able to think. And so when we are immediately hit with some sort of an issue or a problem that we can't just YouTube or Google or whatever, then our ability to navigate that is greatly diminished. And so when we're talking about echo chambers or confirmation bias, it's so much easier to just stay in those rooms, those vacuous kind of spaces where everything around me just supports what I already know or believe, and I don't have to think critically. I don't have to listen to other viewpoints. I don't have to face the reality that I could be wrong about a thing, because that's hard. That goes back to some of the previous episodes.
Yeah. Well, and when you think about human evolution, not to take it back that far, but in brevity, we had to get over a me versus others scenario to start packing together so that we had a chance of survival. And so we had to start relying on the people around us back then, literally right near you, to create a group, to have a chance of living and to distribute the work and that sort of thing. And we got to this point where, okay, I have my group, I have my people, and we had formed an us identity. But then we still have this us versus them that we're still, I think, figuring out as a society.
Yeah.
How do we exist as a group among other groups that have opposite and opposing opinions from ours and still get along and coexist?
Yeah. And we could make a distinction between actual human survival and then the day-to-day operations of functioning as a human in a modern society.
Mhm.
Like, it is normal and natural for people to seek out others that are like them, whether it's race or religion or ethnicity or nationality or whatever. That's perfectly normal and natural. You even see it in our training centers. It quite often looks like a middle school dance where you have the women go to one side and the men go to the other side, and people of similar races are partnered with each other. It's a normal, natural thing. And I think especially at the beginning, when newer people are coming in, that's what you see.
Yeah.
As they get exposed more and more to the diversity in the room, you start to see them partner with people outside of their kind of manufactured groups or teams or whatever.
Right. Realizing that they're part of a new team.
Right.
And it includes all of these diverse people from different teams to come together.
But that takes a conscious effort. It's like if you're building a company or an organization or whatever, you have to consciously create diverse teams. So you start with whatever your organizational structure is, and obviously that's going to be like-minded people, because that's how
it starts.
A thing. That's how you build a thing. But to get beyond whatever that thing is, you need to embrace the idea of bringing in different people with different thought processes, different mindsets, even the idea of listening to the new guy, or listening to the guy that's going to speak outside of his lane. In our industry, you hear very often, hey man, stay in your lane. And there's definitely something to that. But there's also something to listening to the guy that maybe peripherally has an idea of what you're doing and who you are, but it's not really his world. If there's a good example of this, I think I'm going to get this right, but when Steve Jobs was first with Apple,
Yep.
you know,
I think I know where you're going.
everybody told him, look, man, focus on personal computers. That's what you know. That's what you do. That's your thing. Focus on that. And I think if he had listened to that, we wouldn't have an iPad. We wouldn't have an iPhone. We wouldn't have had an iPod. There probably wouldn't be a Pixar, you know. And there are countless examples like this of somebody getting outside of their lane. But then you have to have other people around that are willing to listen to somebody outside of their lane, that are willing to jump outside of that echo chamber and say, look, he may not really understand mobile phones, but he has a vision. He is an innovator. He has ideas, and we think we can make those ideas work for us.
Wasn't it also Steve Jobs that they created a whole new like position, a nighttime position for him?
Yeah. But they did that because he couldn't work with other people.
Right. But they realized that it was worth the jump.
Yeah, absolutely.
You mentioned, so since we're on the topic of social media, I mean, newsfeed algorithms have one job: figure out what kind of content you like, serve it to you. And it's great as a marketer. And if you're in our centers, around our other businesses, actually all of our, this included, I'm about to pull the screen back. Part of what we do when we are presenting pictures on social media for the centers is trying to show you as the viewer that people like you are here. Because subconsciously, that's what we're doing when we're scrolling through. When I'm thinking about going to this new place and I'm looking through the pictures, whether it's known or not, you're thinking, do people like me do this kind of thing? And so as a marketer, when I put on my marketing hat, that's what I'm trying to show. Diverse groups of people, women, young, old, overweight, whatever. Like, we have a bunch of different people here. There are people like you. You're going to fit in. We're going to bring you into the fold. That's what we do.
Yes. Well, it's even when somebody comes into the center, like how many times have I walked in, looked around the center, looked in a room, looked in a class, or whatever, and been like, where are the women or whatever, you know? And it's multifaceted. Obviously, I want women there because I think that what we do is important. But also, if a woman walks in the front door and they see it's 12 dudes, like that's very difficult to envision yourself fitting in.
Right.
And so the idea that we want to seek out like-minded people, people that are like me physically, you know, people have the same level of experiences that I do, it's an important thing. When it becomes, I think, detrimental and dangerous is when that's all you do.
Right.
Is seek out information, people, organizations, whatever, that think exactly the way you think.
It's interesting to see it evolve in the center because you come in and you gravitate more towards the people that you can relate to, and then you make friends across that entire group.
Yeah.
My 30th birthday party, which hasn't happened yet somehow because I'm not 30, but don't worry about the math on that one. I had 74-year-old there. I had an 80-something-year-old there. And then I had friends around my age, and there were younger kids, and there were people from different states, different countries, maybe. I can't remember. And that's from the environment that I grew to know and love, this new group that I've created. I didn't walk in the door starting to hang out with the 74-year-old, but eventually he's a great friend.
Listen, we have a teenage girl that's a member that has been having some knee issues, and she came in to visit last night, and the first thing her mom said to me was, she didn't know we were coming. I surprised her because you guys are like her second family. And she's only been there a few months.
Yeah.
And so if you look at my sparring classes, and I say this often, I promise you they are probably the most diverse place in the county.
Yeah.
On any given night.
Yeah.
Where it's a true variety of everything from gender to age to ethnicity to socioeconomic background, you know, and that's the thing that they have in common is they all want to grow and get better together. They don't have to think the same way. They don't have to live the same way.
Nope.
But they get exposure to the way other ways people think and live.
Yeah. And, for those of you listening that aren't in our direct area, aren't within our centers, those are the groups we would love for you to seek out. They exist in other places, they exist in other industries. We were just talking this morning. By talking, of course, I mean texting, because this is the only actual talking we do towards each other.
This is the only talking I do, period, when I'm not teaching, to be clear.
That's true. That's true. So we were texting about how special our group is, how cool it is to have 70-year-olds asking about where the teen kids are, how we have teen girls so deeply involved and committed and interested to the point where they literally miss this place when they aren't here, kind of thing. And creating those environments is so important and healthy to society and community, to where we start fighting the us versus them mindset. Because you might look at another group and think they're different from me, but you also look at that other group and go, wait, I know that girl. We hang out together every Tuesday, Thursday night for an hour doing kickboxing classes.
Yeah. I have literally seen members on social media that have diametrically opposed political views, lifestyles, whatever. But then they come in and they touch hands, and they sweat together, and they get tired together, and they punch each other in the face, and they have fun, and they high five, and all those things. There are ways to work and seek outside of, but it's a conscious effort. You have to actually try to do it.
Yeah. I think this starts leading into some studies that I looked at in the book, Predictably Irrational.
Great book.
I love it. It's where essentially, this is a horrible overview. Go read the book. It's amazing. But humans are irrational. We act irrationally, but it's in a predictable manner. Like, we understand how our brain puts things together and sees patterns and extrapolates data, even if it doesn't rationally and logically make sense that way.
Yeah.
So this is just an example. Two people are watching a football game. There's a pass, a long throw. The guy catches it, comes down, whistle blows, end of the play. And you and your friend are watching, both on opposing teams. One of you is absolutely for sure that they were out of bounds on that catch, and the other person is absolutely for sure that they were inbounds on that catch.
It's crazy that you bring up this example, because literally yesterday, while I was doing some work, I watched a 30 for 30.
What's that?
It's kind of a ESPN based documentary series on different kind of moments in time. And this one was the Miami University football rivalry versus Notre Dame football. And the title was Catholics versus Convicts. And the reason that was the title was because back during the kind of the nexus of this rivalry, there was a Notre Dame student that started printing his own T-shirts. Okay. And he was selling them in his dorm. Like, he was literally printing them himself, selling them in his dorm. He was selling them for like $1.
I appreciate the hustle.
And so he had come up with several different designs. He had been doing this for a while. Nobody had kind of messed with him. They kind of let him alone. Their licensing wasn't really a big thing.
What year are we in?
I don't remember. It would have been late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah, that gives me a good idea. Okay. Different today. You'll get shut down in seconds.
Yeah. It was before there were like big time licensing agreements and things like that. I was only like, for those of you that don't know, I work on my laptop, and then I have a TV on in the background for noise. Basically, I can't do the silence. It needs to be just background that I can kind of listen and pay attention to. But it worked out.
He lives in chaos. Yeah. No one should be surprised.
Yes, but it worked out really well, because there was a play where the Catholics versus Convicts thing, real fast. So this kid, somebody else came to him and said, "Hey, we want to do this shirt." And he's like, "No freaking way. I'll get kicked out of school." And they're like, "Well, nobody will know you're doing it. We'll be the front person. We'll be the ones that are selling it, whatever. We just want you to make them." And so he did. They ended up selling a couple thousand of these shirts, because that's what they could afford to produce. They sold like crazy.
I'm sure
everybody, it was the whole idea of, along the lines of what we're talking about with social media. You either loved it or you hated it, right? It drove the narrative of, I'm going to buy this shirt because I love it, or I'm going to buy this shirt because I hate it.
That's marketing genius
yes,
right there.
Yes. And so anyway, there was a play during the game, and throughout the show, they're interviewing players and coaches from each team, 20, 30 years later. And they would show the play. One player is like, no way, he was down. It wasn't a fumble. They're watching the exact same thing, exact same angles. The other player is, of course, it's a fumble. It got stripped. It got knocked out of his hand, whatever, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, it was wild that I literally watched that yesterday, and you bring this up.
Yeah, that's crazy. And it goes into another definition of confirmation bias, which is when faced with disconfirming data, people continue to maintain rather than relinquish their theory by modifying it to take account of the disconfirming results. So they might say, no, he was definitely in, the refs didn't see it right, the angle was this. They're going to have a reason that they know for sure, even though we're staring at the footage right now.
Yes.
But both sides are just absolutely certain that they're correct.
Yes. Well, and I mean, I'm sure ego plays some role in that because again, it's kind of like we talked about in the last episode. You have to be willing to acknowledge you were wrong. You have to be willing to acknowledge there might be something other than what you have held to be true for 20, 30 years or whatever. And then you're forced to think, okay, well, what am I going to do with this information? I have towed this line for decades, and now somebody is giving me irrefutable evidence that I've been wrong. So do I dig in my heels, which is honestly what most humans do?
At the very least, a knee-jerk reaction for sure.
Yeah. And sometimes they get offended or defensive.
Yeah.
It's like, and that's when I think there's this internal dialogue and conflict, and it manifests itself in a defensive external way.
Yeah. On the note of being absolutely sure of what you're seeing, we're going to move to being absolutely sure of what you're hearing. And so, listeners at home, yesterday I texted Ryan a Wikipedia link that had an audio clip attached to it. And I can't tell you what the word said is because I clearly hear one word and Ryan doesn't hear it at all.
No, I hear the other word.
You will.
It's not as plainly as it's written, but I definitely hear the other word. I don't hear the word that you hear even a little bit, and it makes me wonder what's wrong with you.
I can tell where the sounds are to hear your word, but my word is so clear.
No.
Okay, I know you might be lost at home. I know. Okay, you might be lost at home. You might not. We're talking about the Laurel Yanny debate. I hear Laurel so clearly, plain as day, and there's some other little white noise sounds in there that I could see maybe people hearing as Yanny, but I don't hear it
like
at all.
Normal functioning humans? Yes.
No. All right, listen. I'm putting a poll in this Spotify episode, which a lot of y'all dropped the ball in the last episode, 2 episodes before this, that poll. So make sure you're checking polls if you're on Spotify because we have questions. We want answers.
Yeah, the one response that I got on that poll, like somebody private messaged me.
Oh, okay.
And the poll was,
not helpful.
What day?
What day?
And the answer was every day.
Okay. Well, then it's the same as the results we have right now, other than our one response. But regardless, so there's a poll on this episode. Tell us if you hear Laurel or Yanny. If you're not sure what we're talking about, pick either one of those words, type them in a search engine. You're going to get a whole lot of internet related to it. I'm going to move on from that because we have diametrically opposed opinions. And I'm going to go find my friends that hear Laurel, and you can go find your friends that hear
I don't
Yanny.
care what anybody else thinks.
Yeah.
That's the difference. I don't need that echo chamber.
So in regards to how we see things and process, by the way, Laurel Yanny is a wavelength, a sound. Like there's some science to it. They understand why people hear one word.
It's probably male, female, old, young, blah, blah, whatever.
High pitch, low pitch. Yeah. There's science to it, just like the dress thing. That's a light thing. If it's blue, black, or white, gold.
Yep.
Okay. I don't want to dig up that one. I bet we agree, though.
By the way, I have a notepad this week instead of my tea because the line to get tea here was really long. And I realized at the last episode that I would think of something that I wanted to say later, and then I would forget it because she keeps throwing all these weird names and quotes at us. And so I can't remember. So I'm making notes. That's what this is.
And viewers of this podcast will be impressed. Like, it's real. All right. So in terms of what were we talking about? The different sounds, the different colors. Again, a lot of it comes back to expectations. Now, some of those, I can't just think the word Yanny and then listen and hear the word Yanny, but I do think it helps me try to pick out those sounds. I know you didn't do that. We're not going to talk about the Laurel side.
Yeah, no, I didn't.
But I'm going to tell you another study from Predictably Irrational,
Okay.
where they set up this coffee shop in a college, and they were giving out free coffee.
Well, yeah, because it was a college.
Right. So, but near the coffee station, there were a bunch of interesting things that you could add to your coffee. And I mean, like cardamom, lavender, just very strange things that nobody really touched.
Yep.
And then they set up another coffee shop and they set out the same things and nobody really touched them. At the end of the study, they asked participants how much they would pay for their coffee. In one of the setups, the random little things they put out there were just in like paper cups kind of thing, and you could just dump it in or whatever, that kind of thing. And then in the other setup, it was much cleaner, much nicer, much sleeker looking. They were in actual canisters, that sort of thing.
Yep.
And even though in both groups, no one touched that stuff, they still would have chosen to pay a higher price for the coffee based on how upscale this section was.
Yep. The experience.
Right.
The aesthetic, the feel.
The aesthetic, yeah. The feel. It gave them this higher quality feel, and they were willing to pay more for their coffee.
Yeah.
Not that it's the exact same coffee, and everything else being equal, they were still willing to pay more, even though it didn't even impact them.
Yeah. I mean, I think we see that in hotels and, whatever. Oh, it's nice. We can pay a few bucks more, even though you never use the stuff that you're supposedly paying for. It's and it doesn't cost the hotel much of anything to have these extra little amenities, though. I'll tell a fast story. When I took my first degree black belt test in Krav Maga, it was in Sherman Oaks, so just outside of Los Angeles, and I was staying at this place called the 777 Motor Inn, and the name itself probably tells you what you need to know. I was concussed going into this thing. I'd been on IV fluids that week because of the concussion, and so I would go into the room, I would close all the curtains and everything and make it as dark as possible. And then I would literally pile stuff in front of the door because I'm like, this place is the most terrible hotel I've ever stayed in by far. There's stains on the floor. It's bad. And so, how a lot of hotels have little continental breakfast, complimentary, whatever. Mm-hmm. So this place, I kid you not, they had this outdoor covered area. It was outdoors, but it was covered.
Oh my God.
And it had like a little buffet kind of setup. Not a buffet like buffet of food, but like a buffet table kind of thing.
Sure.
And on it, they had a microwave and they had a toaster and they had a loaf of bread, like literally a loaf of bread that you would go buy at the grocery store, like in the plastic wrapped up. And they had a jar of peanut butter and a jar of jelly and a knife. I kid you not, a knife just stuck down in the jar of peanut butter. And that was your breakfast.
That would be me as a B&B host.
And so I definitely would have been willing to pay a little bit more for a different experience.
But it is crazy how that experience impacts you. Just, So we've covered sounds and sights and experiences. We're going to move on to another interesting study I found from the New England Journal of Medicine. And it started with a Jim Rohn quote: "You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with."
Yeah.
Which is more of a call towards having high achievers around you and rising to the level of people around you, doing things that they're doing. And I don't think that's wrong. Although this article was like, actually, there's more to it than that. And I agree. And there are both sides depending on what barometer you're using to measure this, right? But they looked at a study over a 32-year period of obesity rates in social networks. And they found that, and this was from 1971 to 2003, if a friend of yours becomes obese, you yourself are 45% more likely have a chance to gain weight over the next 2 to 4 years. But if a friend of your friend becomes obese, your likelihood of gaining weight increases by about 20%, even if you don't know that friend of a friend. And then the effect continues another person out. If a friend of the friend of your friend develops obesity, you're still 10% more likely to gain weight, which, obviously we know our 3-foot circle is important. Focus on your GAF radius,
Yes.
your give a fuck radius.
Yes.
But it's crazy how those ripple effects are still going to come in at you.
Yeah.
Out at you from different social networks.
It's for whom the bell tolls,
Mhm.
There's only so many degrees of separation between, we're still talking about a relatively tight circle. If you're talking about 2 or 3 people out from your immediate circle, that's still pretty close. It's, we're still community. Those kinds of effects, I think you see, well, even in like relationships, you see people, hey, I'm going to start trying to lose some weight, or I'm going to get in shape or whatever. And then their partner decides to do the same, and or they go the opposite direction.
Yeah. So I'd say 1 or 2 outcomes. Yeah. That direct influence. And this study, it worked the same with smoking and even happiness.
Yeah.
Which the people around you are so important for your own health and wellness. It's wild.
Yes. I want to go back to the Jim Rohn quote for a second, not because of the quote, but because of what you said after the quote, because I see and hear and feel this a lot, especially in what we do. Anytime you boil something down to a soundbite, a quote, a few little words, a phrase, whatever, obviously there are going to be pieces unfulfilled. There's going to be something missing to it.
Yeah.
Especially on the internet, and maybe there's some echo chamber to this as well, or whatever. The want to point out, well, but what about this is wild to me.
Mhm.
Like, obviously, Jim Rohn is not saying this is a hard and fast thing that I'm trying to boil down into a sentence. Don't be so quick to see something and immediately think, what's wrong with this thing? Because again, I think there's a huge confirmation bias that plays into that. I don't necessarily agree or disagree, or maybe I don't know, but I'm immediately looking to try to find out what's wrong with it, why I don't like it.
Yeah.
I think when you look at things through that kind of filter, that kind of perspective, you're automatically shutting yourself off to new information and new ways of thinking about whatever it is, when your first instinct is to decide why you don't like it.
Yeah. I think that calls to what I think is going to be our last definition of confirmation bias is people cannot describe what disconfirming results would look like.
Yeah.
They have this belief this person is putting something else in front of them, and they can't just see it and be like, maybe I'm wrong.
Right. Well, how many times have you seen on social media where somebody will make a snide comment on something that they clearly don't really care about, but they feel compelled to just say, like, I see things on social media all the time that I don't agree with, don't like, think is ridiculous, whatever. You know what I don't do? I don't comment.
I just scroll on through.
Yeah, because I'm just inviting toxicity into my life, because I'm going to get drawn into this. If I'm commenting on something that is opposed to my thoughts or my mindset, and I'm doing it in a way that's not to engage someone in conversation, that is not to try to gain better understanding, I'm doing it as an antagonist.
Yeah.
Then all that's going to happen is everybody in that echo chamber is going to pile on. They're going to throw on their jerseys. I'm going to throw on mine. Nobody gets better. Nobody grows. Nobody learns. I get myself all worked up. If we go back to very early on in episodes, I let that interaction affect how I feel for the rest of the day.
Why? Because I commented on something I didn't care about in the
Mhm.
first place. And then I let all these random strangers get me all worked up about something that is inconsequential.
This is where I wanted to move to next. Thank you for that. Let's talk about beating this confirmation bias.
Okay.
Uh,
Well, that's weird because that's what
that's
I've
what
been
you
taking
were
notes
just
on.
doing. Oh, okay, great. So I'm going to start with an idea that the CEO of Upworthy threw out, and it was to not just find opposing viewpoints, because we could easily see something quickly that was diametrically opposed to what we believe, or do a quick test or a quick Google search of something that maybe I didn't believe in or whatever. But you have to actually want to read those opposite viewpoints, especially if we're talking about social media. The algorithms can tell when you don't actually care, when it's a quick click and you're off again, when it's a quick scroll, when it's a slight pause. You have to actually be listening and engaged and interested.
So here's an exercise that I actively do. Sometimes I don't realize that I'm doing it, but a lot of times that I'm purposely doing it, and usually it's in personal interactions, not like on the internet, because that can just be a complete shit show.
Of course.
I will quite often take the contrarian view, even if it's not a view that I necessarily agree with, because it forces me to think outside of what I actually believe might be true or right. I do this in text conversations often, email
Don't point
conversations
that at me.
often.
Don't point that at me. Weird. You being the
I,
devil's advocate? That doesn't sound right.
But it's not just for the sake of
It's not
the
for,
other person.
Yeah,
it's for my sake as
too.
well.
I understand.
I'm like, quite often when you hear somebody playing devil's advocate, it's as an attempt to make the other person think outside of whatever they're thinking.
And it still goes to confirmation bias, because you're still trying to make them prove that their point is right.
Yes.
Not consider alternatives.
Right.
Yeah.
I do it more often than not to force myself to think outside of what I believe or I in quotes know to be true. In my life, I've probably made lots of bad decisions because I didn't have enough information.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that I've ever made a bad decision because I had too much information.
Okay.
And so, in order to have more information, all the information, too much information, whatever, then I need to have viewpoints that are outside of what I currently have. And so if I can force myself, and it's not easy. Actually, I think it is easy for me at this point because I've done it so long. It's almost, I almost do it without thinking about it. But it's a conscious effort. You have to you have to think, okay, well, if we were on a debate team and we threw in a topic and immediately I gave you a topic and I said, you have to argue, boom, this side. Well, even if you disagree with it, you've got to be able to argue that side. I mean, lawyers do this all the time. They have to get up in front of
both sides.
Yes, they have to be able to do that. And I think as humans, it's a good process for us to go through. Not on everything and not all the time, but if we're not ever doing that, we're not growing, we're not improving, we're not getting better. We're going with the same information that we came in with, and we're leaving with that same information. And maybe it's right, maybe it's wrong, but I won't know.
I like that as an idea, as a thought game.
Yeah.
To really push yourself outside of what you know and what you believe. The game I like to play, this is a little outside of confirmation bias, and it calls to something called the solipsism problem. No idea if I said that correctly. I had to look up what I do and see if it was a thing, and found out it was a thing. And basically, I try to look at somebody and confirm that they have their own realities and existence outside of mine. Because I don't actually know. You seem to possess consciousness and you exist outside of me, and I'm highly interconnected with you, and that seems true. But then I'll listen to a true crime podcast and somebody got killed on my birthday. And so I'm thinking, oh, I know what I was doing that birthday. And their reality existed at the same time, as a way to kind of connect myself to them. I can tell you're super interested in this, by the way. I know I'm a lunatic. It is what it is. But you can't know exactly what other people feel and do and think. So it's a fun game I like to play that you will never play, that you don't think is fun, to almost put myself in there.
I would have to understand it to be able to play it.
You know how you can't ever see your eyes, but you know they're there?
Do you know how we've had a conversation about when you go to explain things, it only gets worse?
Yeah. Are you telling me to stop?
I am making the assumption that other people listening understood what you said, and it's just a me problem.
That might be a big assumption, but we'll find out when this hits the internet. But I am going to move on to make sure I'm not digging a grave any further and go on to another means of beating this confirmation bias, getting out of your echo chambers. And this one was put forward by Chuck Klosterman in his book, But What If We're Wrong? And I love this book. This whole book could probably be quoted into this episode, but he suggests using the framework that we use to look at past situations to look at current things.
Okay.
So if I was going to ask you who one of the greatest writers ever was from past history, you would probably pick?
It depends.
Just pick iconic writer that stands out in your head.
John Donne.
Okay, great. Forget the fact that we have Shakespeare quote mugs, but that's fine. At some point, we sum up a lot of one genre into one or two people or things.
Yep.
It's like if we're going to talk about, and I know you're about to zone out right here, but maybe they won't, marching band type music, marching music. Like John Philip Sousa is going to come to mind. And that's about the only name I need to say. And we understand what's going on. Musically inclined, music people, band people, move on. Anyway, there's this, when we look at the past, we tend to sum up things into a big event that happened in a time period or a main person, a main figure. So if we look at the present right now, like we are already in the future and looking back on it, we can start looking at where we might be wrong. You're gone. Oh man, I don't like this. All right. Well, it's been a great 6 episodes with you guys right now. We are going to go ahead and switch gears.
Okay. So I wrote some notes.
Husband of Kindness.
I have some
coming up next.
Action items for, I think, breaking out of these echo chambers, this confirmation bias.
I'm so sad. I'm glad you have notes since you don't like mine.
I didn't say I didn't like anything. That's your bias. All right. So I think to break out of or echo chambers, I think is a better way to use those broader terms. So we have to be mindful of confirmation bias. So we have to actually think about confirmation bias. We kind of touched on this one already. Be willing to listen to the new guy. Think outside of our lane. Don't just immediately dismiss those people. Sometimes dismiss them, but don't just immediately assume that because they're outside of their lane that they don't have something of value.
Sounds really difficult.
It is.
Yeah.
It's weird. Embrace diversity in teams. So we kind of touched on that some, but I think again, it has to be a conscious effort. You have to actually try to create that. Practice critical thinking, seek discomfort. You can see or listen to the last 2 episodes to help with that one.
We got you covered there.
Yeah. Probably above and beyond. Avoid appeals to authority. We didn't really touch on this one, but I thought about it at some point when you were talking. This happens all over the internet, all over social media. You know, it's people are put in a position where maybe they're being proven wrong or they've been provided with evidence that refutes what they're saying. Then their next go-to is to appeal to authority. Well, so-and-so said, or so-and-so did, or this person, this is all over martial arts, self-defense circles. You see and hear this a lot.
If we always do what we've always done,
right,
kind of thing.
Right.
We always
and
get
the whole tradition, lineage, whatever, just because, and it doesn't mean that at a certain time that person wasn't right or correct for the time, but that it's like science. Well, at some point, bloodletting was
lobotomies were answers.
These were the solutions. If you were a trauma doc in the Civil War, you had a saw and a tourniquet and some bourbon. Like that was your trauma care.
We watched that documentary too.
So, and then the last note that I wrote was, and this is a hard one, I think, and I struggle with it too, but be willing to speak last. And my thought on that is when we're talking about teams or groups, especially in a corporate environment or an organizational environment, or even a familial environment, be willing to speak last so you consciously hear what other people's thoughts are before you offer up yours. Because I think once you say whatever you're thinking or doing, it's a lot harder to go back on it. It's a lot harder to backtrack. if you're willing to listen to what other people say first, and actually listen, there's are you listening, or are you waiting to be heard? Those are not the same thing. If I'm waiting to be heard, I'm not really listening to what people are saying to me. And so I think those are some maybe action items you could take if you find yourself maybe lacking diversity of thought, or groups or teams or whatever.
Well, and taking notes helps for that as well, because if you're sitting there thinking about what you want to say and trying to remember it, that's what you're focused on rather than the people.
Yes,
speaking.
which is what I found myself doing in some episodes, and I didn't like that. It made it hard to focus on other things that were being said, because I was trying to make sure that I remembered what I was thinking and what I wanted to say.
Growth,
Yeah, it's weird.
All right. I'm going to end with a quote, because I love this quote, and you'll just have to find a way to make it fit. When people talk about traveling to the past, they worry about radically changing the present by doing something small. But barely anyone in the present really thinks that they can radically change the future by doing something small today in the present.
Yeah.
And one little step towards understanding a different side, towards assuming you're wrong, towards playing devil's advocate, but with a purpose, those little things go a long way.
Yes. Well, I mean, and I won't go too far into it, but we have dozens of movies and TV shows and whatever of time travel, where if you go back in time and you order a cup of tea instead of a cup of coffee, you're going to alter the next 50 years of human development.
3 countries don't get created because of that. Yeah.
Right. But somehow, yes, we don't see the here and now as something that we can actually change or affect. And I think it's because, and we've kind of touched on this on some previous episodes, it's very easy to see really big problems outside of our scope that we can argue about and talk about, because we know we don't actually affect them and don't actually have any effect over them.
Right.
But the things that we actually do have effect over, that are right here in our 3-foot circles, we actually can change. And I think that a lot of times that's scary.
Yes. Well, and it's hard to see because we're in it. And so if we're not willing to take that broad picture look, we miss a lot.
And
of
if you're in it and everybody around you is thinking and saying all the same things, then you assume there's nothing that you can do, or that it's already being done because you're all thinking the same way. And so if you're not seeking out that diversity of thought, if you're not thinking critically, if you're not doing these things, then nothing gets done, or at least nothing beyond what is currently being done will get done.
Yeah. Be different.
Yeah. It's hard.
Well, I'm pretty strange. Strange is easy. Different is different. Different podcast. All right. That's our look at confronting confirmation bias and escaping echo chambers. If you didn't enjoy this podcast, keep it to yourself. Stay off of social media. Go on with your life as usual. If you did enjoy this podcast and this discussion, please follow, share, subscribe, and join the conversation on social media. Thank you for listening to Wife of Violence, and we look forward to growing with you next time.
Thanks, everybody.